Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 28th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Arizona and the Senate leadership PAC funded by Mitch McConnell, or ran, by Mitch McConnell, aligned with is the official term, that is now canceling ad buys in the state of Arizona, the battleground state that Blake Masters, the Republican, seems to be trailing Senator Mark Kelly in every single public poll since the inception of the race. The Senate GOP PAC here is one of the most important ones because it funds the campaign bids for outsider candidates, incumbent candidates, whatever it might be. They fund the Republicans in many of these important races. And to see them cancel ad buys in such a competitive state, following a move just 2 weeks ago of also canceling ad buys not only in Arizona, but also Pennsylvania and other states, the moves here indicate a very similar one that we saw back in the 2020 election about a collapse within some of these battleground states. Now, if you were watching my channel back in 2020, you might remember there were numerous videos where we watched where the ads were going and used them as indicators just to see what the Trump and Biden campaigns were thinking about for some races. For instance, when Democrats were canceling ad buys in the Rust Belt, it was assumed that either one, they were giving it up, which never really seemed to be the case, but rather that they thought it would be locked down. The Republicans, on the other hand, seemed to start to cancel ad buys in some states that just weren't too palatable for their victory, and that was displayed in November 2020 when they lost those states: New Hampshire, Minnesota, these states that the GOP might have thought they were competitive in before, but realized in the final stretch of the campaign season that those should not be their targets because at that point, they were lost causes. Now, you might be thinking, why did I not think the opposite for Democrats and Republicans? Why did I think that Democrats were solidly locked down where Republicans were giving it up because they didn't think they could win them? Well, because I looked at the actual results following them and said, my conclusion was correct. But I will also say, you start to see why. And I will explain to you why I think in this point, in this exact circumstance, the Republican Party is giving up Arizona, at least to some extent, and pushing back in a state where they otherwise would be so competitive, if not locking it down. So for context, Arizona is a state that President Biden won in the last election by 0.2%. Senator Mark Kelly is an incumbent senator who was first elected back in 2020. He won his race by just 2.4%. Yes, an outperformance for President Biden, but 2.4% is not this awe-inspiring major margin that the Democrats had in the state, rather just a margin that was a victory mark that was similar to the one that they saw in 2018. But this victory for Mark Kelly meant that in 2022, he would be a prime target for the GOP as an opportunity to pick up a Senate race. His victory in 2020 meant that he was directly on track for re-election in 2022. Same thing with Martha McSally, and either way, it would be a competitive race. But we actually aren't seeing Arizona, at least, as competitive as it was back in 2020. The polling data in the state is more lopsided in favor of the Democratic Party now than it was in 2020, than it was in 2018, and that's fascinating to even fathom. Looking at the polling average, Mark Kelly is up 8.3% in average on FiveThirtyEight, and based off of Real Clear Politics, about 8.5%. The interesting thing, like I said in the beginning of this video, is that every single public poll, this one from Fox News, this one from different organizations, even Republican pollsters, Saving Arizona with Fabrizio Lee and Associates, On Message with the American Next PAC, these are Republican pollsters. And what do they find? That Mark Kelly is ahead by at least 5 points statewide, higher than his actual result in 2020 and Kristen Sinema's result back in 2018. To even consider the fact that we are in an environment where we have an unpopular Democratic incumbent, the Democrats are barely up in the generic ballot. They were up in 2020 by a margin of 7 points. They were up in 2018 by a margin of 8 points. I mean, what you found was that in 2018 and 2020, these Democratic candidates were enjoying what was expected to be a blue wave year. And in 2018 was, in 2020 sort of fizzled out, but Democrats still won their trifecta. But you are talking about a polling environment 7 points to the right of where they were back in 2020. And guess what? The Democratic Party still pulls ahead in Arizona, and not only does pull ahead, but by a margin that was not similar to what we had seen in 2020 or 2018. So a lot of that thinking goes into this decision from the Senate leadership funds. This is $10 million, $8 million of which were allocated to the state of Arizona, half of the total ad buys within the state of Arizona by this GOP PAC. And they're canceling them and pushing them to October. Now, you can read this full article on Politico. I've decided to highlight some parts that I think are quite important. We'll just summarize the importance of the race, and I will then further talk about the implications of it. But we've generally gotten the background about the state of Arizona. So let's talk about why this $8 million is super significant. So Mitch McConnell scrapping $8 million in ads, again, half of the initial Arizona reservation, pushing the ads to now start in early October. Now, I will say the state is not being entirely given up. That would be politically stupid and just a complete miscalculation on the GOP side. But you do start to see things lightening up in terms of the GOP's dump on the Democratic Party. Republicans and Democrats should be one for one in terms of fundraising numbers, in terms of ad buys, but they aren't. Democrats now, following this removal of the $8 million in ads, are about in a 4-to-1 scenario within the state of Arizona. Nothing good for the GOP, especially in a year where they're racing against an incumbent who's up 8 points statewide. When you take a look, though, you might ask, why are they deciding to choose Arizona? Well, it has to do with a very, very big ad buy that occurred just a few weeks ago, or actually just a week ago or two, in the state of Ohio. If you remember my video talking about the $28 million ad buy into the state of Arizona, it came as a result of a lackluster GOP candidate, J.D. Vance. Now, I'm not calling him lackluster because I have anything personally against him or anything that I am trying to display a message. What I am saying is that J.D. Vance in Republican polls and other polls is either losing or up by just 3 to 4 points. As a Republican in a Trump plus 8 state in both 2016 and 2020, we are in a national environment significantly better than one we were in 2 years ago for the Republican Party, yet this Republican is struggling for victory within the state of Ohio. So as a result, this race, as described by one of the spokespersons for the leadership PAC, as an unexpected allocation of $28 million. J.D. Vance, as the nominee here in Ohio, could not even fundraise over $10 million. Tim Ryan, the Democrat, fundraised over $20 million. There's a reason why this race was becoming more competitive, and it was largely because the Democratic Party was severely outfunding the GOP in terms of ad buys, getting more fundraisers, volunteers, canvassers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What you had found was that the Democratic Party simply had more resources than the GOP did within the state of Ohio, because for a large period of time, they thought it was locked down. Now that it is no longer locked down, that $28 million had to be taken out of somewhere. And Republicans don't exactly see Arizona as their first opportunity. It says here that Republicans see Georgia and Nevada as potentially more fertile territory to flip than Arizona. They also have to focus on protecting their own seats in Wisconsin and big one, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and beyond. And it says here that this organization is definitely not planning to totally pull out of Arizona at this moment. But what I will say is that it is never a good indicator for future ad buys that you are pulling out this early. Yes, they will likely still funnel in every single circumstance money in the final stretch of the campaign season, but at some point a race is lost. That's not to say the race is lost now, but it definitely could become more and more of reality. So just taking a look at the comments that have been made about Arizona, we see here that they're, quote, leaving the door wide open in Arizona. They also see Ohio as an unexpected expense. That makes a lot of sense. This is just something that they never really expected to be spending money on, and it ended up being something that they spent money on, and that's something that I think really was just a complete and total miscalculation on the GOP side. But it's just the reality that we live in, that things happen in American politics that no party can predict, even though it probably should have been predicted as the party that was supposed to take advantage of such a favorable year. I mean, just looking at the generic ballot, just looking at the popularity rating for President Biden, nothing here indicates that this year should not be a red wave year. Yes, Democrats might be leading on the generic ballot, but recognize that they were up in the polls by 7 in 2020. They were up in the polls by 9 in 2018. So for our national environment to be, again, polling 7 to 9 points to the right of where they were in years where Democrats didn't even win control of the Senate or barely did so by a singular seat, if that, by a 50-50 majority. What does it tell you about this race if the Republicans can't even lock it down, much less not even knock it down, losing it by margins not even similar to the ones in 2020 or 2018? There is something larger at work here, and none of it favors the Republican Party. So with this unexpected expense in Ohio, they had to remove ads from the state of Arizona, and they are saying, again, we're leaving the door wide open within the state of Arizona. And there also are other GOP PACs that are including Arizona into a new round of ad buys. But it's never good when you don't have a unified front on a state. And this is also, again, a Biden plus 0.2% state. It's not one that I can imagine would be going in any other direction but right in 2022. And that's simply just not the case. We don't know how much more money is going to be funneled into the race. President Trump, Peter Thiel, I believe that's how you say the name, or is it Thiel? Not entirely sure. His name has been brought up a bunch. Never even was able to figure out how to pronounce it. Let me know in the comment section down below if I'm mispronouncing it. But either way, these two are very, very powerful and very, very affluent men. who have raised a lot of money and have donated a lot of their time and efforts to the GOP. Obviously, former President Donald Trump has done that, but it's not clear either if whether or not there's going to be an allocation of funds from the Save America PAC or from Peter Thiel's campaign or Thiel. Again, correct me on the pronunciation down below. Regardless, though, Blake Masters needs money. The GOP is removing their ad buys, and they need money. And with the Democratic Party moving into the fall, it looks like they will have a huge money advantage ahead of the November election. Democrats have about $40 million reserved for the fall stretch of the campaign season. Republicans had $18 million, but before the super PAC shifted their money away from the state, it's now down to just $10 million, 40 to 10. That 4-to-1 ratio that the Democratic Party has to the Republican Party in terms of ad spending, in terms of ad buys, and none of it is a good sign for the GOP, especially when Democrats are already up. To be polling high, outspending, out-resourcing your GOP candidate when you're up by 8 points statewide means that that lead might increase. Now, realistically, I do not expect the state of Arizona to be the state that shifts away from the GOP entirely, that they have no chance at victory in. I think the margin still ends up in a lean scenario, somewhere between 1 and 5 points in favor of the Democratic Party. But quite honestly, I didn't always think that. Blake Masters, I thought, was the favorite to win the race when I looked at the map for a pretty significant period of time. From November 2021 through April 2022, I had Arizona as a lean or tilt red state. It wasn't until it became clear that Blake Masters was an unelectable GOP candidate that was leading Mark Brnovich and was likely going to clinch that nomination through the endorsement of Donald Trump, through these extremist positions, extremist ideological positions, and ones that he's trying to backtrack ahead of November. But it simply isn't going to work. Since then, I've had the state of Arizona as a lean or tilt Democratic state, and I still wholeheartedly stand behind that scenario, behind that conclusion about the state's direction. I think it is quite fascinating, to say the least, that in a year with such an unpopular Democratic incumbent, where the generic ballot is shifting away from the Democratic Party from where it was 2-4 years ago, even honestly, it's more right-wing than where it was in the 2016 election by polling standards. So to understand that, to know that, and to still see a state like Arizona, a state that hadn't voted for a Democrat before Biden since 1992, it tells me that the GOP significantly dropped the ball. This race under Doug Ducey would have been locked down. If we're being honest about it, Doug Ducey would have had this race by a 7 to 8 point margin, and that would have been the end of the story. But that's not what happened, because the GOP ostracized, or at least vilified to some extent, Doug Ducey. The Arizona GOP, the national GOP, President Donald Trump vehemently attacked him and said he could never become the GOP nominee, even floated the possibility that if Doug Ducey runs for Senate, he would campaign against him, not only in the primary, which might have been a given, but also potentially in the general election. Made an indicator that he'd rather have a Democrat as senator than Doug Ducey. That's how much hate Donald Trump has for this man, and yet he was honestly the Arizona GOP's most electable choice. Well, now that simply isn't the case. Mark Kelly enters into this race with a 71% chance at victory heading into November based off of 538's deluxe forecast. The classic forecast jumps it up to 82%, and the light forecast jumps it up even higher to 89%. I think 71 is a lot more realistic. I think the margin expected here to be somewhere less than 5 points is also very reasonable. I stand by it. I think that this is a very, very good indicator for the Democratic Party, but it also means that the GOP isn't going to be losing by 8. But there has to be something driving voters away from saying they're voting for Blake Masters. There has to be something driving voters to Mark Kelly to a point where he's already at a majority, plus 50.3%, 51.1%, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is a reason why Mark Kelly maintains these leads amongst the overall average above 50%. And that's because voters want him. And it also means that voters don't necessarily want Blake Masters. So the GOP is recognizing that. They're saying that, Georgia and Nevada are more winnable opportunities. And I agree. I think Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker are going to be in for a very close and competitive race where, honestly, we could be in for a runoff deciding the Senate majority yet again. I also think that Catherine Cortez Masto and Adam Laxalt are also going to be in a closer race than the state of Arizona. I also see the concern about focusing on Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin because those races are becoming either more competitive or more pro-Democrat from where they already were. I think that the GOP has definitely dropped the ball in many of these races, and it's becoming very clear when it comes down to funding and who they need to fund, because at some point, you don't have money for everyone. For a year that's supposed to be so favorable for the GOP, they are struggling to raise money. And that becomes a very, very big concern for many Republican candidates. And I think that it shows that specifically within the state of Arizona, the national GOP is recognizing that Blake Masters was not this very strong candidate, is not someone who is on track for a very solid victory, and it means that Mark Kelly is in a more favorable position, and money-wise will be in an even more favorable position ahead of November. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.